The armorer has been convicted. So does that mean that Alec Baldwin is next? Some closure has been found for the family of Helena Hutchins after a New Mexico jury found Rust armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed guilty of involuntary manslaughter last week. But that's not the end of the road in the criminal litigation surrounding the death of the cinematographer almost 3 years ago. You've seen me breaking down the filing of charges against Alec Baldwin and then the refiling of charges against Alec Baldwin. And now it's time to talk about the latest conviction and how it affects Baldwin's upcoming trial. Hit the subscribe button now so the trigger-happy prosecutor doesn't indict you next. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, which is the same charge that Baldwin has been charged with. Twice. A perk of coming second, if you can say that there are any perks to being charged for involuntary manslaughter and having a trial hang over your head, is that Baldwin now has a sneak peek at what evidence and arguments the prosecution has to use against him. A second perk of not being the leadoff batter is that the prosecutors already have a conviction under their belt. Armorers on film sets are responsible for the transport, storage, and safe use of all weaponry and firearms on film sets. The armorer on a film and TV set is present to ensure the safety of the cast and crew when weapons are used. The prosecutor presented to the jury that Gutierrez-Reed failed to properly review the ammunition in the gun and brought live ammunition onto the set. According to the evidence that they presented, the live rounds were on set for a minimum of 12 days, in which Gutierrez-Reed could have found and removed them. The defense, on the other hand, claimed the state was trying to scapegoat the most powerless person on the set while pointing out that the Albuquerque-based ammunition supplier was never fully investigated. After claims from witnesses that the set was chaotic and that Baldwin had too heavy a hand in instructing the armorer, Gutierrez-Reed's defense attorney asked how a 24-year-old armorer only working on her second project could possibly stand up to Alec Baldwin when other grown men around there couldn't. The defense also pointed out that Rust Movie Productions was cited by New Mexico OSHA after Helena Hutchins' death for creating an unsafe workplace by not giving Gutierrez-Reed sufficient time to attend to her armorer duties, including taking an inventory of the guns and bullets on set. After a 10-day trial and dozens of witnesses, including Dave Halls, the film safety coordinator, who pleaded no contest to negligent use of a deadly weapon last year as a part of his plea deal, the jury ultimately decided to convict Gutierrez-Reed on one of her two charges. This was a really interesting strategy that her lawyers used. When she asked the jury to imagine that it would be impossible for her to stand up to Alec Baldwin, what she's implicitly arguing is that he wanted to have live rounds on set, or that he wanted to have live rounds in the gun that he was using, and that basically he wanted to kill someone. Obviously, that's not the verbatim argument, but that's implicitly what they're saying if they're saying that he rushed her, because you have to keep in mind that he has no reason to believe that the live rounds were anywhere ever near that gun, or at least that's what he's going to say at trial. I understand why her lawyers felt compelled to make that argument, since her competence in doing her job as the armorer is the last line of defense against people getting injured. Now, I said last line and not only line, because as the prosecutor is going to argue at Baldwin's trial that he somehow had a position on that line as well. However, it's not reasonable to think that a normal jury would believe that Baldwin somehow wanted to hurt people. Meaning that unless Baldwin knew that live rounds were in play for that gun, it's completely immaterial that he was rushing her in doing her job. Remember, it was Gutierrez-Reed and not Baldwin who ordered the ammunition from the New Mexico ammunition supplier that had the live rounds in it. As you can clearly see, Gutierrez-Reed and Alec Baldwin are being charged for separate reasons. The prosecution's evidence concerning safety failures and lack of diligence with gun safety doesn't directly correlate to the evidence they'll need to show against Alec Baldwin. But what can we glean from the armorer's trial? Well, to me, the armorer's conviction is the best thing that has happened to Alec Baldwin since he got cast on 30 Rock. Here's why. Let's do the technical part first. A jury has said that Reed dropped the ball, that she was at fault. It will not be hard for Baldwin's lawyers to say to his jury, look, guys, a jury has already seen that on these TV sets, the buck stops with the armorer. And they said it was in fact her fault. I mean, beyond a reasonable doubt. She didn't do her job. It wasn't Baldwin's fault if he was allowed to rely on the competence of the armorer. But do you know, she and her lawyers tried to talk to the jury in her case, and try to talk them out of convicting her by saying it was only her second set to work on? The implication is that during the first few times an armorer works on a set, he or she might not even know that they aren't supposed to have live rounds in the guns that are used as props. I mean, that's a wild position to take. And of course, her jury didn't buy it. They found, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she was in fact criminally liable for the death of Helena Hutchins. Baldwin's lawyers will go on to say, look guys, we're all distraught at the senseless and pointless loss of life. It's terrible. It didn't have to happen. And whether one person goes to jail or whether 100 people go to jail, it won't bring back Miss Hutchins. And if you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are outraged, good. I'm glad you are. You should be. I'm outraged. Mr. Baldwin is outraged. Even though we can't bring her back, Ms. Hutchins is still entitled to justice. Her family is entitled to justice. We, all of us, we all want to see justice in this situation. And what does justice look like? Is justice blaming everyone in sight? Is justice going after a high-profile famous person so a prosecutor can make a name for himself? Or is justice instead looking to the person, the one person, whose job it was to make sure that the guns on set were safe? And thank goodness, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, for the clarity of vision and for the hard work done by the prior jury, the one that came before you, because they already determined that Miss Gutierrez-Reed was at fault. And she's already serving her punishment for this senseless loss of life. I mean, that's a rough outline of how I would argue it if I were one of Alec Baldwin's lawyers. Alec, call me. I'm available. But how would you argue it? Drop your pro se opinion down below in the comments. What arguments do you think will work best for Mr. Baldwin? And what are your thoughts on Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's conviction? I want to know down below. And if you want more America's Attorney coverage of Alec Baldwin's upcoming trial, make sure you hit what she is implicitly. We are all distraught at the senseless. That got funky real fast.